Welcome to Life, Death, and the Space Between podcast. Today we have our third part in our four-part series exploring between life regressions and past life regressions. Today we have Michelle Brock on the podcast. Michelle is a New York City-based spiritual development life coach who specializes in past life regression. She is also an intuitive counselor, a psychic medium, a master hypnotist, and has studied spirituality, shamanism, meditation, astrology, and energy medicine techniques from many different world traditions. Based on her own experience, including discovering her own past lives and the spiritual journey that resulted, Michelle is an expert guide and a true mentor to anyone who wishes to discover more about their own true eternal nature and the spiritual journey over many lifetimes we are all on. Michelle is a featured author in the book Miracles Happen: The Transformational Healing Power of Past Life Memories by Dr. Brian Weiss. Her work has been featured in several publications, including Well and Good, Yahoo, Mind Body Green, Elephant Journal, and Bustle. She was also featured in an interview on Comedy Central's hit show Inside Amy Schumer, Amy Goes Deep with a Psychic. I'm excited to welcome Michelle Brock to the show today.
Thank you for having me.
Quite an impressive resume there.
Thank you. I'm a little bit of a dabbler. You can tell the different world traditions and things, but yeah, and all things past lives.
So today we're going to talk specifically about past lives. And can you just start off by describing to my listeners what exactly a past life regression is?
Absolutely, yeah. Past life regression is a technique that is designed to help someone uncover memories from their past lives that are embedded in their unconscious mind. So the term regression implies to go back to a time in the past. So past life regression is using hypnosis to uncover memories in your unconscious from your previous lifetimes.
And how would that be useful to someone in terms of their healing and growth? Obviously, I'm a therapist, psychologist, trained in unconscious memories, but never really that go beyond this lifetime. And so how would I use that to help people?
Well, besides the fact that it's obviously clearly interesting, a lot of people come in because they're just curious. There are a lot of, very relevant, applications for using this. One that just jumps to mind are phobias. I deal with a lot of people that have phobias that they can't, track to an experience that they had in this life, in their current life. So the idea is that the trauma occurred in a previous lifetime, but unconsciously they're carrying that in this life.
So like a fear of flying, which a lot of people have, but a lot of people don't have. How do you know if that's something that is in this lifetime just because of things that we hear versus a past life? Like, can you differentiate that beforehand or?
Yes, yeah, generally with when I'm questioning someone, it's not only how unconscious the trauma seems to be. When you can trace it to this lifetime, people will tell a story, even if they can't remember something from their childhood, they can seem to kind of attach it to something or even a period in their life. Where if it comes from a past life, nobody can even, describe like at what point it showed up. They seem to be born with it. Or often it'll be something that will be triggered when they reach an age or a life event that they were in a previous life. So when it kind of shows up out of nowhere, that often can have a clue that it might have a root in a past life.
Gotcha. Okay. And so beyond phobias, what else do you treat, and how can you take me sort of through what that process looks like? I mean, I know because I've done one. So,
sure. Yeah. Obviously there's a lot of connotations around grief, death, and dying. And that was kind of my foray into it, was really trying to heal from the death of my mother that happened when I was just a toddler. I also had, all my grandparents passed. when I was relatively young. I had a lot of death around me,
Mm-hmm.
but just also just why do babies die and some people live to be 100? It just kind of didn't seem fair to me. Growing up, I always kind of had questions about that, about death and life purpose, life path. I get a lot of people that are stuck at a crossroads in their career, or, what are my skills or my gifts, or what happened in a past life that might have created unconscious fears that might be holding me back from taking a risk or taking a leap or stepping forward, into something new that they want to bring in.
Mm-hmm.
Obviously relationships. I think I get more questions about soulmates than almost anything else, right? Is my husband my soulmate, or is my wife my soulmate, or when am I going to meet my soulmate, right? And obviously we have many soulmates. The idea that we have just one is a complete and total myth, but delving into a past life story behind a relationship will help you navigate that relationship a little more consciously, because you're kind of looking at things that might trigger you or trigger your partner. Or is there someone out there for me? Maybe you'll see someone that you were with before in a past life, and you're kind of like, okay, I know that the energy of that person or the feeling of being with that soulmate is what I'm looking for. There are physical symptoms that people experience. And I would even say too, like generalized anxiety. I see that on probably more of my intake forms with my clients than almost anything else. Like, I'm anxious, but I don't know where it comes from, right?
And people who have tried sort of traditional cognitive behavioral therapy, things like that,
for years.
without success.
Yeah, because it comes from another time and another place, and they can't quite access that, but unconsciously it's informing them, right?
Mm-hmm.
The Carl Jung quote, to make the unconscious conscious, or otherwise it'll rule your life. That's the premise that this work is based on. Obviously there's also a huge spiritual component to it as well, kind of connecting with the idea that you are not your body, that you are actually an immortal soul who's lived before and will live again. I think is very, not only profound for people, but can be very deeply healing for people who kind of suffer from feeling that sense of being disconnected from source. So, and I could go on and on and on about the applications. A lot of people come to me and they're not even sure what they're going to explore, but their unconscious mind always gives them something that is relevant. They kind of be like, oh yeah, I was dealing with, fears around relationships, or I do suffer from depression in the winter, or, whatever it is. So.
Yeah. And I told you before we got on today that I had a recent regression.
Yeah.
And that which is going to be part of this 4-part series, your part 3. And certainly, I went into it with really no specific reason. I just wanted to experience what it was like, and what came up was extremely powerful.
And relevant to issues that you were dealing, right? Yeah.
Exactly. And that was the part, I guess, so can you explain what happens when someone experiences a past life regression? So like, what's the process that you take them through?
Sure. I use guided imagery, and the technique is called progressive relaxation, which is exactly what it sounds like. I help people, through using their imagination. I have them imagine a light. I have them imagine stairs. And I'm basically just getting them to relax a little bit more than they might usually be relaxed, right? In a conversational setting, but not so relaxed that they're going to fall asleep. Mm-hmm. So the idea is to kind of induce that state that, people are familiar with, associated with something called a lucid dream. Mm-hmm. You're not really asleep, you're not really awake, you're having a dream, and there's an awareness that you're present, but yet your unconscious mind is giving you images. So for some people, that's right under the surface. They can just close their eyes and take a deep breath, and they're in that place. Other people require a little more time. I work with New Yorkers, and the joke is always that people come in a little more tightly wound after being on the subway, than in other places. But, the idea is to open your mind and connect with your unconscious, and then specifically, asking to guide them to images that are related to their previous lives.
So how do you know when you're in a regression if what you're experiencing is an actual regression or just your imagination? Does it not matter? I mean, I know when I was walking through, I did the Between Life Soul regression with Robert Schwartz, and it was a long process. I think it was 45 minutes to an hour before we even got to the actual past life portion of it.
Yeah.
And part of my mind the whole time was thinking, I'm never going to get there. I'm not going to be in a past life. And I've had regressions before this one, but I think this isn't going to work for me. And then when I got kind of spit out of this tunnel, which was the experience of how he gets you there.
Yeah.
There I was. So, but I still think there's a part of me that found it so profound because there was a lot of emotions connected to it, but also questioning, is it my imagination?
Totally. And particularly for you, because you're a therapist, it's going to be a little more intellectual for you than it would be for some other people. And, as far as your initial question, does it matter? According to my mentor, Brian Weiss, who is an MD psychiatrist, he says, who cares? If you made up a story, it's still true, right? From a cognitive behavioral therapy point of view.
Right.
I happen to believe they're really people's past lives, and it's based on experiences that I've had myself and seen other people have. But to me, the biggest clue that you're experiencing something that is memory or something that you're carrying with you energetically from your past life, which are generally emotions. We have these emotional reactions and they become energy. Those are the things that we bring with us in our energy body from a past life into this life. Something that's fantasy or projection or something that you saw in a film or read in a book and an actual memory, in my opinion, has a different emotional quality. So some people leave and they say, how do I know I didn't make that whole thing up? I'm like, but you're crying.
Yeah. And that to me was actually the dead giveaway. Like,
totally. It feels like something.
Yeah. I couldn't believe that I was watching this, what seemed like a movie that I was in.
Yeah.
But there was so much intense emotion around it. And the tears just felt like they came out of nowhere. And the reality of that situation was so incredibly powerful.
Wow.
And then I was thinking, well, of course this is real.
Yeah.
But then I think when you step out of it, and I tell people all the time when they have these intense spiritual experiences, you will finish it and then you will start doubting it, right? Because our mind kicks in.
And I think that's like disconnection from talking about these things in such a normal, practical way. Like people that have someone died and then someone visited them after they die, or I have a son who is a very vivid dreamer, and he'll say, Mom, I had that dream again. The one where I'm like an Asian girl in the dream, right? And I say, well, that's probably a past life, buddy. And he's like, oh, okay, right? We don't talk about these things practically in this culture. So it does become this kind of, wow, that's really weird. Did this happen to me? But yet most people feel a profound sense of relief and release after a past life regression. Like there was something that you carried that you were able to just put down. Did you feel that when that happened? Like that was just, nobody feels worse after a past life regression. Most people feel better, right?
I definitely felt like, okay, this makes sense. And I mean, I've been living kind of with this mindset for a while. And your mentor, Dr. Brian Weiss, was the first, my soiree into all of this when I read Many Lives, Many Masters when I was 18 years old and thought, there might be something to this.
That book is so powerful. And I think it's translated in like 42 languages worldwide. And it is because it's just so genuine. And he's a genuine person. I absolutely adore him. But it's just like, wow, I didn't know what was going on either. But this is what happened to this woman. And she got better. Her symptoms got better. And that was really what mattered.
Right. And so for me, there was no symptoms per se. It was just something that I know that I was working through certainly thinking about, why is this happening? Why am I responding this way? Why? I mean, a lot of it had to do, frankly, with my podcast and putting myself out there.
Yeah.
And wondering why it had been taken me so long to be comfortable with.
And my mind automatically is forming hundreds of different past life stories that could, being someone who's a healer or speaking these sort of spiritual truths has historically not been, depending on what culture you're in, right? But in our Western civilization, certainly doesn't always go so well.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And my other question is, when you do multiple regressions,
Mm-hmm.
do you ever go back to that same life in a regression, or is it always different lives?
99% of the time it's different lives. The only time people go back to that same past life, and also too, the fact that you've experienced a regression probably helps me describe this, is that it's a snapshot, it's a moment in time. And when you think about just in this life, in my 40 some years that I've been on this planet, there's 1,000,001 snapshots and moments of time. So going back to the same past life, you might go to a different moment in that past life. If you go back to the exact same one, it means we missed what we were supposed to get the first time, that there's something unresolved. That just tells me that there was something they either were avoiding. That happens very rarely, very, very rarely, at least with me. I like to get what we came there for, right?
Mm-hmm.
What does this mean? How does it relate? Let's pull that up and let's get rid of it. And then you don't need to go back to that same time.
And is there a processing component afterwards? As a therapist, obviously, I'm a big talker, processor. Yeah. But I experienced this past life. I have the ability to process things because it's what I've been doing for years, and was in therapy for a really long time, and have done a lot of spiritual work as well. Where does that component come in? Particularly, I wonder, for people who have experienced significant trauma. We spend years processing trauma that occurred in this life.
Yeah.
So 100%. Does it require that for a past life?
In my opinion, it does. And in fact, there's nothing that drives me crazier than when I meet someone who says, "Oh, I did a past life regression once. It was really weird. I don't know what it means." I'm like, well, nobody helped you figure out what it means? Like, what was the point of doing it? So the way that my process works is that we spend some time, we set intentions, we discuss for a while, what's going on in their life. Were there any traumas in this life that I need to know about that might have echoes in a past life? And we really, really go through and this is my process as a life coach. I want to know, what are you looking to change or shift or bring in or let go of? And then we do the past life regression. And as part of that, there is a spiritual regression too. So I guide people through the process of their death in a past life. And then we experience that being beyond the body, between lives state. And there's some processing that happens in that state. I always ask them, in that state, what was the lesson you learned from living that past life that's most important for you to know today? And the reason I wait until they're in that spiritual state to ask that question is because people tend to be a little wiser, a little aware of their journey over many lifetimes, even by remembering being in spirit form. So we start there. And then after we finish the regression, we talk about it. We pull some threads. I encourage my clients to journal, to allow this to be a process, an unraveling of different layers of yourself. And it's fascinating. People are fascinating, like the
that I would agree with. Yes.
Yeah. So, that's my approach. I don't think it's just about like, wow, that was cool. That was like a weird historical movie that I happened to be in. To me, there's always some sort of processing and, kind of sitting with it, letting it go and connecting the dots. That's the most important part.
Mm-hmm. And how long do your regressions typically take? Or is it normally part of like a coaching process? And
yeah, my coaching sessions are about 2 hours long. And we generally will spend that entire first hour talking about stuff that happened in their life. If it's someone that I already know, we'll talk about stuff that happened since the last regression, because we want to kind of shake the snow globe. Different things happened. Oh, I broke up with that partner and now I have a new one, and we want to talk about that. And then the actual hypnosis, the regression, is about an hour, depending. I'm not going to pull anybody out of it because their time's up, right? Which I know as a therapist, you probably you have to keep
yes
somebody's in the middle of a deep share. So
for my patients who are listening and know we have to stop right now. It's
it's not your fault, but it's just what it is, right? For something like this, so there needs to be completion. So I like people to reserve 2, sometimes 2.5 hours to do this, but the actual past life is generally about 45 minutes.
And do we know, this is probably not the most intelligent question, but about how many lives we've experienced? Like, is there a certain amount of time we have to not be in a physical body before we return to a physical body?
This is a fascinating question. I love this question. So who knows how many lifetimes we've all had, but it's my opinion that for those of us who have chosen to reincarnate right now in 2019,
bummer,
probably had more than 1 or 2, right? And people say that to me all the time. Because I say I live in New York City, which I find to be a challenging place to live spiritually, mentally, emotionally. People are like, what if I never had a past life? I'm like, if you live in New York in 2019 and you've never been here before on Earth, you're in the wrong place.
Right.
It's like grad school here, right? So as far as how many, it's hard to say. And I don't use the term old soul because I don't believe that age guarantees wisdom, right?
Well, and I went to one of Brian's workshops and he said, he totally flipped that on his head. I think he said something along the lines of, maybe it's really like the news. Like if you're an old soul, it might mean you're not getting it. So you just keep coming back.
And it's like you keep learning the same lessons. That's exactly right. I use the term evolved soul because evolved kind of implies that we got the lessons that we reincarnated to learn, and we kind of use them to grow and kind of step into, a more loving spiritual state. But I've had people recall past lives that were ancient. And I had one woman who had a almost prehistoric past life. She seemed to be some sort of Homo species that wasn't Homo sapien. So maybe like Homo erectus or something like that. And her specific intention was to explore her connection with her husband. And so they were like Homo erectus together. I'm like, honey, you guys have been together a long time, like a million years. That was kind of related to her intention, that the fact that she was shown that. But as far as the second part of your question about the rate at which we spend time between lives, it depends. If there's some sort of trauma or an intentional death, suicide, you're going to come back right away. You're going to come back fast. Or if you're worried about someone that you love and you feel attached to that life still, you'll tend to want to jump into the next vessel available to help you reincarnate. I've found that that's the one exception to kind of the general pattern that I've noticed. It seems that people who had past lives earlier, even this century, the average time, and this is actually something I know that Brian Weiss agrees with me on, the average time of waiting between lives is about 40 to 60 years. It seems to be more like 15 or 20 now, maybe even 10. And I think that it's because there's just a lot of stuff going on here on planet Earth. There are a lot of opportunities for growth. It's a crazy time. And I think that also explains the population growth. I think more of us want to be here right now. For the next phase of evolution that we seem to be creating. That's kind of what I'm tracking from the work that I'm doing with past lives. Someone who had a past life 2,000 years ago might even spend 100 years on the other side before they decide to come back. But somebody who passed in 1960 could very easily be reborn in 1970 or 1971.
And so that brings up this notion of time.
Yeah.
And connection to past lives. And are there really past lives, or are lives simultaneously happening? And I've heard of people who do future life progression.
Yeah. And the future life progressions come up occasionally in my sessions with people. And it's interesting because I don't believe the future is determined. I think we're actively creating the future with our choices. When that happens, it's like, here's a possible future, or here's a new future that you just created based on what you just let go from your past, right? But I think it's really interesting that, and I'm kind of a nerd with this stuff. I read a lot of quantum physics and things like that.
Yeah, me too.
Yeah, I mean, things that mystics have been talking about for thousands of years, we're actually starting to prove are true, right? Multiple dimensions of reality all happening concurrently. One of my Native American teachers talks about time, that time doesn't move like an arrow, but it actually moves like a wheel. And this is ancient Native American teachings that basically the past, present, and future are all happening concurrently. So what we're doing in a past life regression, in my opinion, is that we're tapping into a space that's within us, that's also outside of us, that is the realm of spirit. And that realm of spirit lays outside of time. That time doesn't exist. So we have past lives as humans. So we experience time as humans, which is why we experience it as the past. But on a spiritual level, it's all part of our collective concurrent experience. Is that?
That makes sense to me. Okay. No, because I mean, I always liken it. I think the simplest way that I often think about this is when I'm in meditation. And sometimes it seems like I've been in meditation for 45 minutes. And sometimes I've been in meditation for 45 minutes and it seems like 5.
Yeah.
And that sort of distortion of time for me is always fascinating in terms of where your consciousness goes to create that distortion.
What you just brought up is actually the number one thing that I mentioned when people, after the regression, they say, well, how do I know I was really in hypnosis, or how do I know I was deep into it? I always say, what time do you think it is, without looking at your clock? They always say, oh, it was only like 15 minutes, where it was an hour and 15 minutes. And then they're like, oh, whoa, I did go somewhere because time moved in a different way. And Kabbalah talks about this, that there were rabbis that could exist outside of time and travel in a 4 hours distance in 10 minutes. I mean, it's a really interesting concept, but that mystics have been able to tap into that. Regular people haven't. Maybe time travel, maybe that's like the future of our species. I know we're evolving. We're using more parts of our brain. We're using more things like telepathy. Who knows, right? But that's kind of my take on it. It's the past because it's a human experience, and we experience time as a human more like an arrow and less like a wheel.
Right. Which makes a whole lot of sense.
And some people describe having 2 past lives that happened at the same time. And this is also something that my teacher Brian talks about too, that it's possible for a soul to split into 2 in order to get more experience kind of concurrently. So I've had some people are like, well, in the 1930s, I was a woman and I was a man at different parts of the world. That's also something that's very common too. And people do that to kind of get more work done.
So you can split your soul and incarnate into 2 bodies simultaneously.
Yes.
And what would that be called?
I mean, there's actually something, it's called a doppelganger. Have you heard this? They say that everywhere on Earth that somebody has that. I think that's where they get this idea from. And it sounds freaky. If somebody else is doing some work on my behalf somewhere else, on my soul's behalf somewhere else in the world, thank you. Do I want to meet them? I'm not really sure. Right? That's kind of, but I think that the idea is that anything's possible, and that the idea is that we come here specifically because we want to learn. We want to have experiences because we're beings that learn by experience, and that we plan what we're going to do beforehand. And sometimes we decide that it would be better to kind of just get more work done in order to prepare us for, a lifetime that's coming down the road. We have a bigger picture, bigger window view on our soul's journey over many lifetimes.
And that to me is the biggest healing piece, I think,
Yeah.
right? Is that when you have that broad view, which isn't easy to get, I think it's still hard because we're still humans in a human body with human emotions.
Yeah.
That when we lose someone we love, or you lost your mom at a young age, it's a hard thing to wrap your mind around the concept that, oh, this was I planned this.
Yeah.
And it's okay, because it doesn't feel okay.
The two most profound moments, in my opinion, and I've watched thousands of people do this now. I've been doing this for a really long time. It's that first moment when they experience themselves, their consciousness, who they call the I, in a different physical form. And it's even better when it's a different gender or a different ethnicity. They're like, wait a second, this who I thought I was. There's like a sledgehammer to the mirror of who you thought you were. And then the second most profound moment is after they experience their death, and then they realize that their consciousness is now separate from that body, and that consciousness can occupy that same level of consciousness without physical form. That's incredibly profound. And that experience alone changes people's lives, even without the story or without the healing or getting rid of a chronic illness that they had for years or whatever it is. It's literally the most interesting and profound experience. I wish everyone in the world could do it. I think it would change the way that we view ourselves, each other, purpose, that kind of thing.
Humanity.
Yeah. World peace, right? I'm working on it.
Me too. So what would you say are just a couple takeaways from your work, from how we can continue to use what you do to evolve?
Yeah, I think that the biggest takeaway, and I'm actually working on a book about this, is really about equality. Like that idea that we are our bodies, or we're our circumstances, or we're our IQ. I had a past life. My first past life experience was with Dr. Brian Weiss, and it's in his book, Miracles Happen, that you mentioned. I could feel I was a man, and I could feel that I wasn't very intelligent, which was just so strange, because I pride myself in being well-read and educated in this life. And, so the idea that in some lives we're wealthy, some lives we're homeless, black, white, rich, poor. I think that that's the most profound thing I've learned from watching so many people have this experience, that our struggles are universal, although they might be individual for each lifetime. We're all working on different things in this particular classroom, in this particular school at this time, but yet the entire process is deeply universal. I think if everyone could understand that, there literally would be world peace. There would be no war. We would understand that our differences are only surface level, but our spirits are all connected.
Mm-hmm. Wow. I love that.
Yeah.
So we're going to wrap up today, but if people are interested, because you do regression, you don't have to live in New York City.
No, I do sessions via Skype. We can do phone sessions. I have an online, a few regressions that I put online. I try to make it as accessible for everyone. I literally do want everyone everywhere to have this experience. But if somebody wants to do a private session with me, you do not have to live in New York City.
And they can find you at Michelle
with 2 L's -brock.com.
Perfect. Well, thank you so much, Michelle, for your time today.
Thank you.
It's always fascinating. I feel so lucky that I get to talk to all these interesting people who are doing all this interesting work on the unconscious in a different way than I was trained to do the work on the unconscious. And I love it.
Thank you for your very thoughtful and thought-provoking questions. I had a lot of fun.
Me too. All right. Thank you. Like what you heard today and want to hear more? Curious about what comes next and what it all means? You can subscribe on iTunes. Just go to podcasts and find Life, Death, and the Space Between and hit subscribe. And you can follow me on Twitter and Instagram at Dr. Amy Robbins. Ask me any questions you might have, let me know what else you'd love to hear about, or just share your story. I can't wait to hear from you.